Okay, welcome back to the February 11th Community Development Block Grant Advisory Committee meeting. We have completed the interview process with the capital improvement applicants, and it is time to deliberate and approve funding recommendations. I would suggest, obviously, given the difference in the nature of the capital projects from the social projects, that we're going to probably approach this in a different way. There's really nothing too much from last year to carry over, and I don't want to do that at all. So I think we'll just go line item by line item, and I will give each committee member a chance to briefly discuss their thoughts and give an idea of whether or not they want to fund the program and how much, to see what kind of consensus we can build, and then we'll discuss the entire funding recommendation as a whole.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr.
what
Cornell.
is the revised funding that is available for the CIP?
I think at this point it hasn't really been revised. It's still sitting at $281,000. Is that correct, Mr. Duran?
Chairman Nemeri and Committee Member Cornell, the revised amount available is actually $316,750.
Oh.
316?
And what does that include, Mr. Duran?
$316,750.
750, okay.
That includes an additional, it includes 65% of an additional $43,670 in program income. That's the difference between what we're reporting today and what you saw last. And it's on the worksheet, so you'll see how it compares.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Duran.
Here it is, yeah.
Mr. Olivares?
Before we go down this path of
Yes.
making allotments, I just want to say a couple of things.
Sure.
Last year, we agreed as a committee to bring back, I believe it was $300,000 for the pool project that we used from last year's allocation for a particular project or two that were ready to go. So my first question is, and then I'll follow up with that, is what is the status of those projects? And did they indeed start construction or are being built?
Committee Member Olivares, those construction projects would be the current year community capital improvement projects, which would be reflected by the Armenian Cultural Foundation Community Youth Center, which is probably 80 to 90% into construction, so it's well underway. It includes the Center for Mission and Community Development by Glendale Adventist Medical Center, and as you heard today, they're hoping to go out to bid within the next couple of months. And it was $345,000 for the Home and Etman conversion of the warehouse, which they haven't gone out to bid yet. They're in the plan approval and permit process.
Okay. And here's why I asked this question. Because I'm having, personally, a real hard time reviewing what we did today. Those are all viable projects. They're projects that, just like last year, are in a much better position to be built as opposed to some of our city projects. And I would like to keep an open mind in terms of maybe we want to take the same tact as we did last year, with the commitment that we put it back, and I'm speaking of the pool project, with the commitment that we'll put it back next year and do the same thing we did this year and allow some of these projects that are ready to go. These are immediate jobs and they're immediate projects that could be built. So I wanted to bring that up because I have a tough time with all these four projects. They're all viable. They all need to be done. And yet we're kind of putting money aside that we're not using now. And I think we should consider that. Those were my thoughts.
Thank you. Anybody else want to comment? Mr. Cornell?
I will, if no one else, Mr. Chairman. I like Mr. Oliveris' proposal. I think it's sound. It worked last year. We're not sure about this year. It's a different perspective. It's a political year, with the election 2 months away. I can go along with a portion of what Mr. Oliveris is proposing, but as a backup contingency, I would like to make our own recommendations, because I feel we're up here for a mission. We've been appointed for the job. I know the council is always in the hot seat. They have the final say on this, and it should be, because they're the ones who are going to take the heat for everything. But nevertheless, this member feels that we're here and we got to do what we feel as presented in front of us, be fair, equitable, just, whatever manner, and to make recommendations instead of just passing it off to the council.
Thank you, Mr. Cornell. Mr. Bagassarian?
I think we have to, if we look at the numbers as we have them with the 316,750, we're short about $235,000 in funding. We had at least the Glendale Adventist that talked about possibly having some additional money, and I know we have to go through the process and identify the dollars. And they mentioned about the fact that some of the project could be, done in the following year. And they have their project for this year, which is what we funded. So I think we could look at both, keep an open mind in looking at the pool project. Maybe instead of trying to get all the $235,000 from the pool project, which is currently planned for $1.5 million, maybe part of it, 100,000 of it, maybe we'll just ask for, and there's something of that sort. So we'll actually look at this year's project as well as combination of the both.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bagassarian. Mr. Sinanian?
I just agree with the general spirit of Mr. Olivares' comments. These are, most of the proposals are valid, solid programs that need to be funded.
Sorry. My only issue at some point, as we keep taking the money, at some point, if we have to give it back, at some point will come a year that we don't have any funds available for it because we've taken so much from the pool project. If they come back and say, year 08, 09 you took this, year 09, 010 you took this other, now this year you'll really have. So if that would apply, I don't know.
Mr. Olivares?
I don't see it that way. But you're bringing up the point about those possible funds coming back from GAMSC, which we talked about somewhere in the neighborhood of 170.
175.
Potentially, and that's not going to happen all at once. It will happen in 2 stages. That itself could be a commitment that could go right back to the pool project. In other words, we're looking today at the request for $275,000, and if we look at that and if we were able to fund that, then that completes their project, and in the future the surplus money is going to come back. We could make a commitment that money would then be reallocated to the pool project, as well as the commitment that if it's $200,000 or $300,000, whatever amount that is, we will commit to putting it back into the pool project next year, just like we did last year. So I don't see any problem with that.
That makes
also
sense.
because we don't really know at which point they're going to be ready to go with that project, the pool project. It's the same argument, same discussion we had last year. So personally, I mean, I would like to fund all these 4 projects and make the difference up, borrowing it from the pool project allocation right now with the commitment to put it back next year.
Thank you, Mr. Olivares.
I'll just say one
Mr.
last thing.
Cornell?
With what Mr. Oliveris was saying, if we do get that reprogram and the current funding for that $175K, we're looking at a difference of roughly $60,000 here.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that again?
Yes, we're looking at a difference of roughly $60,000 if we do get the funding from Glendale Adventist reprogrammed. back from that 175,000.
We're short 270,000. We're short about 235,000. So if you anticipate $170,000 funds being available to us from Glendale, then that's correct. And all we are doing, in a sense, we're just taking $60,000 to $70,000 fund.
Mr. Olivares?
And I would, if we do decide to go down this route with our proposal to City Council, I would not make it contingent on the Glendale hospital funds because we don't really know where they're going to be or what's happened. I would make the commitment to restore whatever amount we borrow now from the CDBG allocation next year. If the money from GAMC comes in, then great. But I don't want to put the council in a position that it's contingent on somebody else doing certain work or performing in a certain manner. I think we need to take that responsibility at the committee level based on next year's allocation.
Mr. Sinanian?
My only problem with that train of thought is that next year there are going to be new, additional, just as valid, just as good requests for proposal. And are we going to? I mean, the money that we're going to have to reapply towards the pool project is going to have to come from somewhere, and it's going to come at the expense of these yet to be determined new projects next year. Is that going to be fair? I mean, are we next year going to have literally no budget to allocate to anything that's not already pre-allocated to? If we take into account that all the money that we're going to have is going to go towards the pool project just to refund them for what we've taken this year or last year.
Mr. Olivares?
Yeah, I don't think that'll be the case, just based on the allotment that we get for these types of projects every year, unless the council decided to pre-designate all of the capital funds towards the pool, but they haven't done that.
Right,
So.
But it's our current budget is $281,000. So if you take, we get the same number.
16.
316.
Okay, 316. You got revised to 316. So if you take the same number, 316, and we're saying we're going to take $230,000, or considering that we will wait to see what comes back from, that already takes out of the two. And I don't know how much we borrowed last year. In a sense, we said we'll take it and give it back to you. 300. So I don't know how we're going to, if the funding levels stay the same, next year we'll have $316,000, and we have 2 years of $300,000 and 1 year of $235,000 that, we in debt to that,
Yeah, but here's what I'm saying is we look at the we look at $316,000 after all the pre-designated projects. See, we're really starting at $2.4 million.
Yeah, but what we're doing, we're taking money from pre-designated projects and funding the community projects. What we were going to fund out of the 316, same way we did last year. So in a sense, we're we're taking the money, and at some point we're taking like an IOU. We need to give this money back, the $300,000 that we took last year, and now we're proposing to take another $235,000 and saying, well, when the pool project is ready to go, we'll give it back. Well, we're not going to have the money to give it back, if we borrow at the rate that we are.
I follow what you're saying. Yeah. Sure, we're just taking it down.
I think if we could come up with a scheme that and I know it's difficult because then the funds that would be available from the Adventist hospital need to come back and be reevaluated along with other projects. But if we could somehow, if it was possible, as part of our rules that we have governing us to allocate that, then we can say that for the project that they have, X amount of it, we're pre-designating this money. That way, we know we have that available to us, and we can deal with it as part of today's deliberation.
Mr. Sinanian?
So what I propose is just keep an open mind about this whole thing, and as the numbers become more solid, we don't exclude the possibility of looking at the pre-designation, as opposed to making categorical statements that we're going to take $250,000 out and such.
Well, I think we need to have the discussion with merit of the projects and come back. And that's all I was suggesting is let's just think that way as we go through this.
What was the
Mr. Cornell?
What was the timetable Mr. Churban and Mr. Nelson indicated on a possible reprogramming of those funds? Because evidently, if they are, then we're going to have to come back and have an action item on that.
Unless we,
Do you know what that was, Mr. Duran?
Mr. Creo?
Mr. Cornell, members of the committee, Mr. Nelson suggested that, one, he be allowed to carry over the 0506 funds into the new project, which is existing 0809. That project is currently going out to bid in a couple of weeks. So with bids coming in, let's say 4 weeks after that, so we're looking at 6 weeks out to know what the exact bid amounts are actually going to be. He's quoting 125 based on an estimate. We won't know till 6 weeks from now what the exact figure that's going to be.
And
Yes. So they'll be starting construction in about 3 months.
Mr. Bagdasarian?
see, what I was going to comment on it is that, if we look at the project, it seems at least that is one of the projects that could be, and it's $275,000. It's our most expensive project, and they stated that it could be done in a 2-year plan, and as much as what they do is valuable to the community, and the fact that we have this issue with available $150,000 to $275,000, we can really look at that project as being, and the fact that, as I mentioned, they just finished the 0506 project, they're going to bid for 0809 project. They're saying they're fine with doing part of this project next year. We can really look at that project and say, is this a project that it's a very valid, very good project? We want to make sure that building can be used. They said they have some office space that if they had air conditioning could be used. That's wonderful. Office space are needed for all the service that they provide. But we can really look at it and say, okay, maybe this $275,000 we allocate. And if you look at their project, if I recall correctly, there's 4 or 5 phases to it: architectural, asbestos removal, and so forth. So we'll give them some money so they can start working on this part of the project. Or they talked about doing half the air conditioning, doing the other half next year. We'll use that to see what could be done with our funds, and then you cut that to a level, knowing that some funds would be coming back to them from there, and some project we will postpone to 2 years. And because some of the projects that we're looking at, it's like, I look at Home Edman, it's like a project that they have the center, they've paid $4 million. They have kids waiting to use this facility, and if we just can do the work, sooner we can finish the work, these kids could start taking advantage of this center and start using the gym and so forth. So, to me, that's what I'm trying to keep in mind as I'm, thinking about, rearranging some of this, funding timing.
Mr. Duran?
Yes, Mr. Chair, committee members, and I think another approach you can take to accomplish the same objective, which is to fully fund the community center projects that you have before you, and keep the Pacific Park Pool project whole, is potentially to go ahead and allocate the $100,000 to the Glendale Adventist Medical Center. It's going to take them a year to complete plans and specs and rework and further develop their HVAC project. In the meantime, we know we've got $42,000 in available surplus funds to be reprogrammed to that project or any other project, including the Pacific Park Pool, if that's what we decide to do. And also during that time, they will get bids for their Phase 2 of fire safety improvements. We'll know if the surplus is $100,000 or $125,000 or $140,000. And in the meantime, they're still planning and designing their HVAC project. And then once we know what the final figure is, we can come back with a report and to the advisory committee and recommend reprogramming whatever the balance is to either Glendale Adventist Medical Center or another project. And hopefully it would be close to the amount that we would be short as of today.
Okay, thank you. Couple of things, and I've heard everything that you, my fellow colleagues, have had to say on this issue, and also staff. Everybody, I think, in the public knows that while I support the idea of a pool project, I have specific questions regarding just pre-designation and the manner in which the funds are kind of stored away for years at a time, while other projects that may be ready to go are sometimes overlooked. I do know one thing, gentlemen, and that is we were specifically told, not that that this has ever stopped me, but we were specifically told don't touch that money. And here's my concern. What I do not want to do in any way, shape, or form, and as I mentioned on Monday, is create an us versus them type of situation. I think I do not want to undermine in any way the I don't want to call it goodwill or good faith, but the credibility that we have amassed in the manner in which we've carefully deliberated these programs this year, and we've come to a conclusion. I still have some questions regarding these projects even. And I think there are several ways that we can accomplish what we want to accomplish this year, especially in light of the Glendale Adventist Medical Center's, the things that we realized about them without either consciously or unconsciously, biting our thumbs in the direction of the council, because that will end up with a plague on both of our houses. So I think we should talk about the specific projects. I have a suggestion for how to handle the Adventist Medical Center, and just doing some quick math. I mean, looking at what we have available at the $316,000 versus how much the projects are being requested, minus the $42,000 that they're sure about, and the fact that they're willing to break it up into two phases. I think it might be smarter for us to, pre-designate our own money next year for the Glendale Adventist Center, for their phase 3B, and instead of going after the pool, because I do realize the council may be watching, the public is definitely watching, and I do want to say that I fully understood the admonition that we got. Don't touch that money. And I'm going to do everything I can to avoid doing that. At the same time, I want all of you to understand, if I feel that it becomes necessary to do so, little things like pit bulls have never stopped me from jumping over a fence. So, Mr. Olivares?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, we're here to work for the council, essentially, and so we need to follow that direction, and that wasn't my intention at all. My intention is to get these projects funded because they're ready to go. I do, however, like Mr. Bagdasarian's suggestion, if we do have these funds potentially coming back from GAMC, and we make a commitment again to reallocate it to them, and they know that, then they can continue on their path as Mr. Duran suggested. They got some front work they need to do anyway. If we can look at it that way, absolutely, and that keeps the pool project or the pool funds from being touched, and so essentially we're being a bit creative with the situation, and that's a good thing.
Mr. Cornell?
I would second that as far as what Alec mentioned and Mr. Olivares, to fund it in phases here. And then we could come back, and evidently we're going to have an action item, according to what Mr. Durant said, before the end of this fiscal year, that we can still act on it. But right now, to balance out for the available funds that we know we have right now, I am in favor of going on a phase funding at this time.
Okay. Yes, and before we talk about any of this, we had requested that the executive director of the HomeNet Men ROT chapter come back to us with any detail that he may have been able to garner regarding the electrical, the wall of, what is it, the amp?
Electrical panel.
Yeah, the panel.
The amp, 1200 amps.
Mr. Chairman, member of the council committee, first off, allow me to apologize if the report that I gave you or the proposal that I gave you was not complete. Misconceptions on my part. In your package that I brought to you, I had to call the Hilltech company. Unfortunately, he was in a car going to Santa Monica. He couldn't give me anything in writing. So what he told me on the telephone, I went to the office and brought it over to you, the scope of the work and the breakdown of the $92,000. That's one item that I gave you. The other item is the budget that mid-year last year, when we decided to make some changes, we went to the Community Development Department, and with their agreement, we came up to this budget that you have in your hand, the same $345,000, excluding the electrical panel, so there is no electrical panel in the revised budget. And the third one is the plan, which in a very hasty manner I just could highlight them in green and yellow, indicating where the existing panel is and where the proposed panel will go. And I am more than willing to answer any questions that you might have.
Mr. Gregorian, thank you, by the way. It always seems every year we make you jump through just a couple of extra hoops.
Well, that's how I keep fit.
There we go. There we go. I do see the budget for the 0809 that doesn't include the electrical panel, and I see here the scope of work for the electrical panel that was proposed to be moved, and this makes a lot more sense. Now there's an old transformer there.
The way I understood from the management of the Hilltech was that we have to pay $25,000 to the city of Glendale just to get rid of that panel, the one that we are trying to remove. Just to get rid of that and whatever transformers and all that, $25,000 fee to city of Glendale. And that can be verified, I'm sure, by the staff. But I'm just going with what he has told me. And then we have to purchase a waterproof new panel, and including the labor and the purchase price and everything to install it just immediately outside of where it is right now. And then there's the cost for engineering and getting permits.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Olivares?
Yeah, thank you for this, because this really does clear up a lot of my questions.
Yeah.
At least now I know where the panel is and what you're basically rotating it to the outside of the building. The $25,000 payable to the city of Glendale, I'm very familiar with those fees, so I know that's
Sure
a
you
very
are.
legitimate cost. And what I like about this now is that at least staff, because they're not construction people, have a line item they can verify against an invoice from your organization when the monies are due, and that's really just a way of accountability. So, thank you for providing this, because this
One
cleared
thing
up a
for
lot of
sure
questions.
that whatever we do, we always work very closely with our case manager and Mr. Carrillo so that we're sure that the steps that we are taking are correct, legal, and the right way to do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
That's
Mr.
okay.
Bogusarian?
I just want to thank you for doing this, and you don't have to apologize. There was type of thing
Well-
that we just came up afterward and we asked you to do, and we appreciate the fact
Sure
that you
thing.
did provide us.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's jump right into it. I think this time I'm going to suggest something just to get us started off, and then we can discuss it, because it seems like the idea that I'm getting from everybody's comments, so that we don't have to go, one by one, and I'm sure it's going to be a love fest for most of these programs about how we think they're funded based on the comments. I think I'm looking at my math here, and this is what I would propose. I'm going to put a proposal on the table. I would propose that we do indeed fund project number 1 at the full amount, which is $182,995. Project number 2, which is the New Horizons Family Center, at $7,684. project number 4, which is the Roosevelt Middle School Parkway improvements at $85,764. And I would recommend, given the fact that we know that the Glendale Adventist Medical Center has $42,000 available, I would recommend funding of $33,000 in order to give them $75,000 to address in their budget. If you guys, if my fellow colleagues will look at their budget, they have the architectural and engineering at $25,000, the asbestos abatement at $25,000, and the electrical at $25,000. It gives them money that they can start off with in order to get the project moving, phase 3A, let's call it, and then with the idea that we would actually pre-designate our own funds and put them in the lockbox and tell the council we have 5 pit bulls here and a Doberman, and fund 3B next year. That would be my proposal, and I think if we add that up, could we just toss that in there just to take a look at it?
See what our
I think we
balance
should
is.
have another $6,000-$7,000 left. That even the 33 could come close to 40,000.
Even with his figure.
Yes, with his figures.
And while they're putting that in there, I'll give an opportunity for my fellow committee members to respond. I think Mr. Sinanian?
Yeah, I
The
think
Fort
it's
stays is the same number.
I think it's a great plan. I do want to suggest or
And I would just
really
put that
query.
40,000 there. That's the balance remaining.
One at a time.
Sorry, yeah.
I do want to ask if, as a general principle, it's great and it works. If within the span of next few months, it becomes clear as to how much of the projected $120,000 of stage 2 is actually available to them, it's unused. Do we still need to come back, or can we pre-designate that to just go to them and cover the shortfall that they're going to be faced with now? I just want to be fair to them, and I want to reward them for coming back with money and a huge amount of money and making that available to all of us, to the city.
Mr. Sinanian, thank you. Under my proposal, I would recommend that we consider the $275,000 amount and wait until next year's report that they give when they apply for the money in order to give us an idea of what that $125,000 I think they suggested, what that actually looks like. And then at that point, the money would be safe. We'd have it stashed away. But if that $125,000 they save, then the pre-designated money, I guess, that we need for next year for their Phase 3B would be much less. Mr. Sinanian?
My only concern with that is that next year, some of us may not be on this board, and I don't know if we can somehow bind the board to such a commitment on our part. Next year's board, that is. And I certainly don't want. There are going to be temptations next year. There are going to be good programs, good proposals, and a hard decision will potentially have to be made by the board. And I don't want them to get penalized for doing a good job.
Mr. Sinanian, I appreciate that, and I would say nothing we do here is binding in any way, shape, or form, unfortunately. I think the best we can do is make a reasoned and a suggestion that is backed up with our rationale and our logic, and hope that whoever is on the board next year understands that. But in the end, the council can dissolve all of this as well. And I think everything we do here is an advisement based upon, fully vetting out these programs and coming up with the best way to address these shortfalls. But I think the council would appreciate the fact that we've come up with a creative solution without touching the pre-designated funds that they have. Mr. Duran, let's start off with Mr. Duran.
No,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It occurred to me that if Glendale Adventist Medical Center could be as time efficient in the planning and development and design of their HVAC, and move the project quickly, and we're able to reallocate the funds mid-year to that project, that would actually help us out with our expenditure rate, rather than having to wait until July 1st, 2010 for them to start spending that money.
And that's partially what I'm thinking also.
And we do have the next CDBG Advisory Committee meeting is scheduled as of now for May 13th. That may be right after we know how the bids come in for their Phase 2 Fire Safety Improvement Project.
Mr. Wren, I have a question here.
Mr. Cornell?
What the chair was suggesting or proposing that we set aside our own pre-designated as far as this committee. Does this committee have that jurisdiction to go ahead on that process?
Theoretically, you do. Technically speaking, those funds would be let out to bid. And then the committee would just have to determine, once the proposals came in, that you had already agreed to set aside a certain amount for a particular project. But theoretically, HUD requires every year that community organizations have an equal opportunity to apply for whatever funding is available under the Capital Improvement Community Plan.
Mr. Olivares?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, Mr. Duran, but I would also argue that we just saw 4 proposals. They all have an even opportunity to get funded and be heard, and we're actually creating a system whereby they all get funded. So I don't see that as being a problem. I would have a problem if one of those organizations came back and said, hey, we want to go after the reallocated funds. I would have an issue with that, because we're here trying to make a good decision so they all get funded. Now I want to go back to your proposal. You're suggesting that we fund them for $33,000 with the thought that the first 40 or so thousand that they will be bringing back from 3 years ago would then combine to become about a $75,000 initial front money to do all their pre-development work, if you will, with the understanding that somewhere down the line, and I believe it will be within the next year, they might be coming in with an additional $100-some thousand that we as a committee are making the commitment to reallocate it back to them for this particular project. Is that correct?
And that is correct, to make them whole. And it would end up, I mean, likely, based upon what they were saying, it's going to end up being a lot less than we actually put aside this time around. I will put aside the full amount to make them whole for their request, but given that they expect $125,000 to come back, let's say it turns out to be 105, or maybe it turns out to be 130, then what we've put aside, is much less. We can use it for other community projects. And as far as Mr. Duran's concerned, I would say the public can have the full understanding that those monies are available for a competitive process. It's just that it would be the same understanding that they have with pre-designated projects by the council, that we understand that this meets a need in the community, and that we would give it extra weight during our considerations or the board's considerations in the coming year. Mr. Olivares?
What I also like about this is that now we're taking a positive step that GAMC was able to bring in front of us, and we're making it available to them, so they're essentially responsible to themselves to make sure these numbers come in the best possible, because it's going to help them down the line, as opposed to making it contingent on another project or the city or anything else. So I'm for that. If that becomes a motion, I can certainly support that.
I like your
Mr.
proposal,
Cornell?
Mr. Chairman, on that. Was pretty much in line with what I had mentioned on the phases that was proposed by Alec here. And I think with that here, according to what Alec's figures said, that we would have, if we do from the recommendation you mentioned for the 33K, that we should have, be able to fully fund as requested the other CIP projects.
And it's actually it's more like over $40,000 for them, the math there, as opposed to 33,000.
Do we have to pass a separate motion so that the money that comes back from phase one automatically goes back to them to be used for this stage, second stage,
Mr. Duran?
phase two?
Committee member Sinanian, I'm trying to ponder this. Technically, the way it would happen, and so this is for me to check in to make sure I understand the direction. They're $42,000 surplus as part of phase one. We will close out phase one, and we'll have a remaining balance of $42,000. We'll close out phase two once it's completed, and we'll have a remaining balance of, for the purposes of our discussion, $100,000. That $142,000 becomes available to reprogram, as we do in our annual plan. We always have a line item called unappropriated fund balance. So that would go into become part of the unappropriated fund balance to reprogram as part of the planning cycle for fiscal year 10-11. And then the committee would pass a motion to approve pre-designating a certain amount of 10-11's unappropriated fund balance to the Glendale Adventist Medical Center project.
So, with that in
Mr.
mind,
Sinanian?
with that in mind, I mean, the whole idea was to give him 33,000, or Mr. Bagdasarian says it's more closer to 40,000, and that whatever surplus comes back from phase one will get added onto it, and they'll have roughly $75,000. So in order for that to happen, we'll have to make that motion to allocate some of the 2010, 2011 unused amounts.
Oh, okay. So
Mr. Duran?
Okay, so the 42,000 remaining balance from closing out phase one, you want that reprogrammed to the Glendale Adventist Medical Center project now for the HVAC in order to allow them adequate funds to continue to proceed with their planning and development for the HVAC project.
And Mr. Duran, that's because that money has been closed out. We're sure that $42,000 is there, correct?
It's in the it will be closed out. It hasn't been closed out yet.
But there's certainty as to
The
the
numbers
amount.
are there.
Yeah, the numbers are there.
Yes, the remaining balance is $42,000. The project is 100% complete. We're waiting for notice of completion and approval of the final invoice, and it's done. Those funds are there.
Okay, so that would require its own separate motion.
Yes.
Is that
Okay.
correct?
That's my question.
Okay.
Okay.
And I'll move to that effect when the time comes.
I think the time is now, gentlemen.
Well, you put a motion on the floor first.
Yeah,
I
that's
think you
what I-
might need to readapt that a little bit.
Okay, it wasn't a
Well, it wasn't
motion, it was a
no, yeah, it's a
proposal. I
proposal,
can't,
proposal.
unfortunately, I
Correct.
can't make a
That's right.
motion. But it's just a proposal for us to think about it. And I think what we've done is kind of figured out technically what we have to do. And understand, I hope the public understands that we want to make sure we're following the rules here as set out, and we're trying to be as creative as possible without going against the wishes of the council, and that's why it may get a bit confusing, but I think it'll be all clear in the end. So I think the first step is, if my proposal makes sense and is amenable to everybody, I think then the first step would be a motion taking that $42,000 and and appropriating it to the Glendale Adventist Medical Center for this year.
I would suggest differently.
Sure.
I would suggest that we make a motion. Any of us can make. I think we all have an understanding here of where we're going with this. Make a motion with the amounts. Only one amount is going to be altered up here.
Okay.
Make a motion for those amounts. Then we can follow up. It just makes more logical sense to me to then
Sure.
follow up with the second motion.
Sure, that's not a bad idea. In fact, can we take a look at those numbers? If you can put those numbers up, so we know exactly what we're looking at here. Probably not. This time we're going to have to.
With the lights off.
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
You know what? Just if you can actually turn off that last light as well, please. Okay, wonderful. Okay, so we have $182,995 sitting here for the conversion of the warehouse. There's $7,684 for the exterior paint and repair. I'm gonna jump.
New Horizons.
Yeah, that's for New Horizons. And then there's the Roosevelt Middle School project, the Parkway improvement, and that's $85,764. Now that leaves a balance of $40,307, and that money will go to the Glendale Adventist Center, and that would address this year's available funding. And then following that would be the potential motion to take the $42,000, which would actually give them, the $75,000 plus a 10% contingency, to tell you the truth. And it would give them, I think, everything they may need for, to get the process started until we meet in May. So
I think we have a consensus here.
We do.
we do. Anybody?
Mr. Alvarez, why don't you make the motion?
Okay, thank you. I'd like to move that the amounts that were just allocated, I'd like to put that forth as a motion.
And I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Committee Member Alec Bagdasarian.
Yes.
Committee Member Carrie Carnell.
Yes.
Committee Member Efren Olivares.
Yes.
Committee Member Zari Sinanian.
Yes.
And Chair Zari Amarian.
Yes. Okay. Now comes the second part. And as I understand, we had a consensus for that as well. I believe we're going to need a specific motion in order to take the $42,000, which is a firm amount, and appropriate that for the Glendale Adventist Center project this year. Mr. Olivares.
Just keep in mind that that amount is flexible, I think. I think that the final numbers have not come in, but it's somewhere in that neighborhood. Is that correct?
We
Mr.
can
Duran?
phrase it in terms of the balance
And that's
of
what I'm suggesting.
unused funds from phase
Okay.
one.
I'll make a motion that the balance of the unused fund from the CDBG funding for the year 05-06, which is about $42,000, be allocated to the Glendale Adventist Medical Centers program for their HVAC project.
I'll second.
Before we go to roll call, Mr. Duran?
Yes, Mr. Chair, if you want it to be exact, the exact amount is $42,373.
$373. Okay.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Roll call?
Committee Member Alec Bagdasarian.
Yes.
Committee Member Gary Cornell.
Yes.
Committee Member Efren Olivares.
Yes.
Committee Member Zari Sinanian.
Yes.
And Chair Zari Amarian.
Yes. Okay, and the third and final part would be I guess it would be a motion again, taking the balance of their request and setting it aside pending our next meeting, which is, you said, May 13th. where we'll get some more information about that $125,000.
Is that a motion, or is that our thinking that as we come back, we know about the project and we'll actually consider it, and in our mind, it's something that we
I actually feel safer with a motion.
Mr. Duran?
Do we need
what
a
would-
motion, Mr. Duran?
What would? Thank you, Mr. Cornell.
It seems to me that you wouldn't need a motion if your plan is to revisit and reconsider this at your next meeting. We can do a staff report, and we can summarize the results of the bids and the projected available amount, and we can, in that report, we can request a motion for you to consider at the May 13th meeting.
Okay.
What has a question?
Mr. Olivares?
Actually, I think that would be the proper way to do it, is agendize it. That means we're going to have the discussion. It also gives GAMC, they should know, I'm sure they'll be on top of this, that that's a critical date for us because we are going to discuss it, so it just helps put a time frame on it.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, it also allows the community an opportunity to weigh in if they felt they needed to.
Yeah, and I think that's important. At the next meeting, I definitely want to encourage the public to come in and give any comments, one way or the other. Again, I think we tried to be as creative as possible, and I think we succeeded so far. Okay, if there's nothing else on this item, let's move to other business. Is there any other business?
I just have a
Mr. Cornell?
Input, Mr. Chairman, regarding our recording secretary, if she completed the analysis and survey, and if she has at that time, that we can have possession of that.
Our grades.
Our grades, yes.
Grades of the project.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I just want to add a word that
Bagdasarian?
it's great that we're being creative, and we're doing that in the spirit of trying to do the best for the community and making sure that all the projects that are available are funded. We did that last year, and we're doing again this year. I think it's great that everybody has that frame of mind, and we're able to work so closely.
Mr. Olivares?
accomplishing it.
Yeah, I brought this up earlier, and I think it's something we should consider. Is we visit all the social services. I think we should probably consider visiting some of these projects as they happen, and just to go see where the money really goes. Also, in terms of construction.
Agreed. I think that's a good idea. Mr. Bagdasarian?
I agree with that, and also agree that maybe the 15 minutes is not enough, and they should, as part of their presentation, talk to us about the service that they provide to the community, in addition to providing us the detail about their construction project.
I apologize for cutting you off earlier on that.
Hearing about it for the next 4 years.
Oh,
but
I know.
One of these times, we're going to take you up on your apologies.
Yeah.
I just wanted to
Cornell?
say, Mr. Chairman, that the consensus here pretty much follows the pattern that we set and the creativeness in going through this process, where we all concur with a 5 rating, which is the best rating here.
For all the projects.
Very good. And Mr. Sinanian, anything?
I'm just happy that we didn't have to touch the pool funds.
Hey, I'm happy with it. It was shaky there for a second.
Well, you gotta make it exciting.
Yeah, I know.
He's a novice. This is first time. First
Well,
year.
my introduction on the day when my candidacy was introduced to the city council was one of the councilmen telling the existing board members not to touch the pool projects. That was
We saw the pit bull
yeah.
while we were
the
sitting
first
in the
thing I
audience.
saw.
Yeah.
I just wanted to, again, thank all of you for bearing with me through this process. It's a learning process for me as well, and I think it was a process that really gave me some perspective on how to deal with deal with all the personalities and struggling in order to keep everybody on the same page. And so it was a great learning process for me. I want to thank you for bearing with me and some of my fumbling as I tried to keep these meetings orderly, which wasn't really a problem, and on point. Thanks to the staff, by the way, as well. And I have nothing else. Public comment, I have no cards, but I do invite the public to come to our next meeting in order to comment on these proposals and even in front of the City Council if they so choose. And if there's nothing else...
I'll make a recommendation for adjournment, but I just wanted to add one comment, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Cornell.
In absence of a survey on your achievements here and your process and your guidance and leadership, we'll make it oral this time. That we got this far and we're able to develop a consensus among us, and it was through your leadership skills and direction that we were able to accomplish these goals and objectives. And I just wanted to say, in the past, differ with ideology and so on, that's all set aside for the interest of why we're here and why we're appointed, for the interest of the people and citizens of Glendale. And you accomplished that. You're a very articulate, dynamic, and fair and balanced chair. And being that I've had differences with you in the past, I want to be the first to say that you did a bang-up job.
I appreciate that, Mr. Cornell.
Mr. Chairman.
I appreciate
I'll
that.
say that if that was a motion, I would probably second that.
I was going to second that, but you're
Okay, guys.
Third, it's
Yeah, you guys can... Mr. Duran.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. A few quick announcements.
Yes, sir.
In terms of next steps. The next step is that we will publish a list of the committee's funding recommendations for social services and capital improvement projects on approximately February 23rd in the Glendale News Press. That will be followed by a public hearing on the funding recommendations scheduled for March 5th at Pacific Park, which will be followed by the City Council's review and approval on March 24th.
Wonderful. Thank you again, and
we already have our motion and second.
Motion to adjourn.
Uh-huh.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.